everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Fall Semester Wine School. I see that a couple of y'all have popped on already. If you are just joining, go and grab your Lost Straw Cellars 2021 Viognier. I'm going to put some in the glass now because today we are talking about tasting technique. So we are going to taste this wine together and see what it's all about. But as always, if you're joining me, please comment. You can comment on Facebook and YouTube, and I can see all of your comments here. So you can ask questions, but also tell me where you're calling from. Tell me what you're drinking today if you're not drinking this beautiful bottle of Viognier. And tell me who's with you tonight. Are you with a big group of friends? I had a friend, Ralph Chance, send me a picture of his family camping a couple weeks ago, and they had this on the big screen, and that was awesome to see. Ralph, I hope you're watching tonight. But yeah, tell me if it's just you, if it's you and another person, if it's you and your dog, if it's you and your family. I want to know what's happening on y'all's side. And also comment. So this is the new pack that we have for the next 4 weeks. Although we will be skipping Thanksgiving, we have 4 wines for the next 4 weeks of Fall Semester Wine School. If you haven't already gotten your pack, don't worry. You can get all the wines that we're going to be drinking the next 4 weeks, starting with the Viognier, and then we're going to have a Touriga Nacional. If you've never had one of those, we have a lot to talk about next week. Then we'll be drinking a Grenache, which I am very excited for. And then we'll be drinking the 6th Skeleton Key Red Blend. So you can go on our shop page and get that now. And our shop page is williamchriswines.com. That'll be live for a couple of weeks. So no fear, you can buy a second pack when you find out you love that Grenache and you love the Viognier and you loved the Touriga Nacional and you want more Skeleton Key for the holidays. Over the course of the next pack, we are going to talk about much bigger ideas than we did the last 4 weeks. So far in these courses, what we've talked about is how to decant and the different ways to decant a wine. We've talked about how flavor comes into the glass from the grapes, from the nutrients that's pulled through the soil, and how that changes during the winemaking process. Last week, we talked about perception versus precision, talking about when a wine tastes tart, it is not necessarily a high acid wine, but how do we get to be very precise about the acidity when we perceive it as high? And so we're going to build on that idea today, and we're going to talk about tasting technique. The next 2 weeks, we're going to build on tasting technique and talk about food pairing for 2 whole weeks, because there is a lot to talk about with food pairing. And if you've ever really wanted to dig deep in food pairing and really crack it open, I have put together an awesome lesson for you guys next week and the week after so that you can learn all of the basics, tap into what you should be thinking about every single time you open a bottle of wine and want to pair it with something, and then how to build on top of that and get really, really advanced and precise with your food pairings. And then we're going to finish the next 4 weeks in December with the Skeleton Key and talk about how to articulate what you like about wine. So all of these roll together for an awesome 4 weeks of wine education. So far, tell me what you learned. What is the one negative information that really stood out to you? Hi, Bill. Hi, Tracy. John, good to see you. And I'm so happy you're drinking the Viognier with us. Hi, Chelsea. Hi, Janice, Lane, Rachel. Oh, drinking Grower Project Peak Pool. We're all very jealous of you. John, good to see you. Awesome, awesome. Bill, thanks for pouring William Chris wine for all of your friends. I know you do that very often, so I'm glad that you have access to some great wine to pour for all of your friends. Shella, hi there. All right. Why don't we kick off a conversation about tasting technique? Okay, so what am I talking about when I say tasting technique? What is the technique here? And this conversation is built on a lot of questions about mostly blind tasting, but also when we pour a glass of wine and we're smelling it and we're trying to get into it and we start talking about it and maybe we know what it is. I know this is the Viognier. And we're going to have a conversation about the wine where a bunch of people are going to throw out all of this information. They're going to say plum, they're going to say blueberry, they're going to say flowers. How do you tap into that in the glass? How do you stick your nose in and be able to recall everything that you're smelling in this glass? It is very difficult, and it takes a lot of tasting, honestly. But there are a couple of things that all of us can do to help prep ourselves to be able to reach into the glass and get more out of it. There is no substitute for just tasting wine, tasting more wine. But there are some things that can assist us here. So before I smell and taste this wine, let's talk about today. Today, I knew I was going to open this bottle of wine. I did a lot of wine tasting today. And everywhere that I tasted wine, whether it was in my home this morning, whether it was on site in the conference room at work, whether it was in the tasting room, everywhere I was, I primed myself for the tasting by first checking my environment. And what I mean by my environment is everything around me that may influence the way that I'm tasting wine. And I do not get as specific as like checking the lighting in my home or making sure that I spray a certain Febreze or anything. All I'm doing is making sure that I didn't cook anything that's really, really aromatic, or if I did, that I go outside and do the tasting instead. Because what ultimately we don't want in our environment is something that's going to interrupt the aromas that are going on in the glass, because everything in this glass is really, really delicate and very, very finicky. So in my environment, I did just eat food. I'm not brushing my teeth beforehand or anything, but I'm making sure to swish my mouth with a lot of water so that I can taste with as fresh a palate as is reasonable. Same with my environment. Although I did just eat food, I made sure that I'm in a part of my apartment or home where I'm not smelling a bunch of extraneous aromas, because ultimately that'll prevent you from getting the delicacy out of the glass. So prep your environment first. Sound reasonable? Is there anybody else out there that does that or preps something in their environment? Sometimes I know a lot of people who will grab a white paper with some writing on it so that they can look at the wine over a white piece of paper, and that does something for them. And that brings me to my second point on tasting technique. With tasting technique, it is all going to center around how you learn and how you pull information from the world around you. So I have a lot of people ask me how to properly set up a tasting. And believe me, it changes per person. My ideal tasting, I'm Bill, I'm going to build on you. Bill puts on great music. That is so great for someone who's an auditory learner. You are getting something, you are like moving your brain waves with that music, and it will help you be more playful when you approach the wine. And Bill, I hope that really works for you. I know you're a great taster, so I assume it does. I need silence. I am a visual learner and a kinesthetic learner, which means I need to be moving and doing something when I'm tasting wine, but I also need to make sure that I am visually prepared. If I, for instance, close my eyes and taste this wine, I will get less out of it. And I have experimented with myself before. When I close my eyes, I feel like I'm shutting off my ears and everything. So, and taste buds included. So when I'm tasting, and this is something that one of my mentors, Scott Oda, told me years ago, is I would close my eyes when I was smelling the wine because I was trying to focus more on it. And he said, open your eyes, look at the wine, like get really in touch with it. And for me, getting in touch with the wine means looking at it, hearing it. If you believe you can hear the wine, getting in touch with the spirit and the nature of the wine. It includes like looking at the viscosity of the wine. All of that is giving me information that I'm not translating it into specific tasting notes, but it's helping me experience the wine deeper. And you have to accept that there's some level of unknown here. I don't know how looking at the wine is changing what I think about it, but I trust that it does. And as a visual learner and as a kinesthetic learner, what I've done so far with opening my eyes has completely opened wine for me. The kinesthetic form comes in different ways for people. For me, talking about the wine is a must. If I'm smelling and tasting wine and I'm not getting anything out of it, it's likely because I'm not speaking about the wine. And it can be as simple as just smelling this wine and saying, I have no idea what I'm smelling here, but yeah, I'm getting a little something. No, I'm not sure what it is. Just speaking about how I'm having trouble getting something out of the wine will help me eventually get there. That being said, this Viognier is speaking to me. So let's all take a moment and smell this Viognier. But if you haven't already, don't swirl the glass first. This is part of setting up my environment. Okay, so smell the wine. I don't swirl it because I'm trying to look at the wine from all angles, which is point number 3. Look at the wine from all angles. Pour it, not too cold. I wanted this warmed up a little bit, not room temperature, but if you chill it down too much, it dulls the aromatics. When you swirl it, a bunch of stuff happens, which is wonderful, but part of tasting technique is getting the most out of the glass, which means don't swirl yet. Take a deep breath. Automatically, I get like a little bit of flowers. It's like a little creamy. It doesn't smell very fruity right now. Maybe there's like honeysuckle or something in there, but I'm not sure. I'm going to go back to smell it again. And now is when I'm going to swirl. And swirl it a lot. Smell it again. I can confirm honeysuckle now. I am smelling honeysuckle. And it got a lot fruitier. That cream note I still notice. So I'm confirming things that I smelled before, but now there's a lot more around it. It's really rich. It's really fruity. And it is so floral. It's so floral, which is a Viognier thing. It kind of also jumps out of the glass, so I don't really need to stick my nose in to really get to this wine. I can smell it all the way out here, and it's very refreshing. That wine has such a high impact. My mouth is watering. It was like biting into a piece of fruit. It was like biting into a peach, like an actual peach. All of the juice that's inside of a peach is what I'm tasting now. Oh gosh, okay. I can't wait to break down everything that I'm tasting right now, but I'm gonna look into the comments to see if y'all had any questions about tasting environments and anything else that I just covered. I'm so excited to taste this wine. I've had it before and I remember it really grabbing me. Awesome. Rachel, I hope you'll go back and get that pack of wine so that you can do the wine tasting and food pairing with us next week. John, I'm so glad you enjoyed learning about everything we talked about last week, which was all the structural components of wine and how to really tap into them. We'll be continuing on that discussion today. John, you're not a white wine drinker. That is totally fine. Actually, that's one of my last points today is to drink things that you are not a fan of or that are totally outside of your realm. It will make you a better taster as long as you go in like no judgment. If you're drinking a sweet wine and you're not a sweet wine drinker, dive into it and find out what's special about it, even though you don't enjoy it. And you will find more in your red wines after that or your dry wines. Hi, Mom. Awesome. Lane, you must be a visual learner with me. When you close your eyes to concentrate, it can really, really damage the relationship you're having with your nose and your taste buds. Awesome. 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 Okay. No questions so far, which is great. I know y'all already know all of this stuff. So thanks for allowing me to just sit and rediscuss things that y'all already know. So, this is a wine that I know that I enjoy. What holds me back from tasting is objectivity. So when I'm tasting a wine that I know that I previously did not like, I am less likely to get more out of the glass than when I'm tasting something that I know that I love. When you have energy behind what you're doing, you automatically try harder to find something in that glass. So, step 4 is getting in touch with yourself and coming in with as little judgment as possible. And there are a couple of different ways to do this. The first way is by like having a little pep talk with yourself. Okay, Kelsey, you did not like the last Pinot Noir that you had, but you know that not all Pinot Noirs are like that, and that they range from place to place, and that vintage variation is a thing, and that people tried really hard to grow these grapes and they tried really hard to make a good wine. So go in and appreciate it for their sake, and then see how that changes your tasting. Because more than likely, you're going to find that you are open to surprising yourself, that you actually do like the wine. But prejudgment can make people shut down when they go in to taste a wine, and they won't taste anything more than I don't like it, and not even try beyond that. The second way to become more objective about wine tasting is go so far outside of your comfort zone. And for me, this was trying orange wine from the country of Georgia, or going to try some really, really natural, really funky wine next to some very new world Oregon Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, or California Cabernet Sauvignon. This is a way to train your mind that wine can be made in so many different styles. And although we all tend to find ourselves in one or two camps where, like, I'm a diehard dry white wine fan, and I like them to be this way, and I like for them to be crisp, and I like for the acidity to be this way. Realizing that that is just my preference on a Friday night versus the other part of me that appreciates every single wine in the world. Maybe not every wine in the world, but the majority of wines around the world, because they are made for a different person's palate. You really need to shock yourself. If you really want to tap into wine tasting, you can't just taste this same bottle over and over. You can't just taste Texas wine over and over. Texas wine can be your Friday night, like Die on the Hill wine, where that's what you're going to drink the majority of the time. But you will appreciate that Texas wine or this bottle of wine by drinking things that are so far from it and appreciating why those wines are made differently than this. Then you start to see what's special about this stuff. This also means that you are expanding your sensory memory and you are collecting smells from a bunch of different places. And I'm going to take another sip of wine before I explain how to expand your sensory memory and collect smells that ultimately will tell you more about the wine. But let's see if y'all had any comments. John, this wine does taste a little sweet. If you focus on the tip of your tongue, you'll notice there's no sugar in this wine. This is all ripe fruit. This is the taste of sweet ripe fruit without the presence of sugar. And you can tell when a wine is dry by the tip of your tongue. That'll typically register if there's any actual sugar in there. There are 0 grams of residual sugar on here. And that really fruity thing is great with something like salt or something that's a little bit fatty, because the wine will taste drier afterwards. Mona, if you don't have this white wine, you could go with something like Chardonnay or a Pinot Grigio. It really depends where the wine is coming from. If you have a Texas Marsanne, that would be the one that I would say, a Marsanne or a Roussanne. Viognier, Marsanne, and Roussanne are all commonly blended together in Texas and elsewhere. Yes, John brought up the good point that objectivity is particularly important in Texas, because very often you hear someone say, I've had Texas wine before, I wasn't crazy about it. And you can say that about anything. I had a Bordeaux once and I wasn't crazy about it. But does that represent all of Bordeaux? Does one Texas wine represent all of Texas? No, there's always some level of objectivity you have to have going in. But if you feel that you're objective about wine, go find something even weirder than you've had before. There are just so many styles of wine out there. Recently, I've been studying sparkling wine, and I got the weirdest sparkling wine that I could. I went to every single country I could think of and had Canadian sparkling wine and Argentinian sparkling wine and Chilean sparkling wine. And then I had Texas sparkling wine in California. And then I went all across of Europe, Australia, New Zealand. You'll realize how much personality there is out there and how you'll never be able to try all of the different styles of wine. And all of this tasting and experimenting and pushing yourself outside of the comfort zone will translate to getting more out of the glass and tasting more, because you can directly compare this wine then to a realm of other wines that you've had that were different or similar to it, which is really cool. John is having cheese that is cutting the sweetness and the acidity. Yes. Like I said, any fat content and any salt content will make this wine seem drier. That sweetness, don't be afraid of it. It is such a great food pairing component, like we'll talk about next week. Awesome. Okay. So, point number 5. And John, you have brought this up, and I've kind of tiptoed around the answer, but I'm going to really clearly answer for you. So John has previously asked me, how do I get better at tasting specific notes in wine? So I stuck my nose in this glass and I said, white flowers and honeysuckle. It smells a little bit like Dove soap. It's very peach. It's very ripe nectarine. There's lemon curd in there. How do you get to all of those specific things? And the answer is no, I don't go smell lemon curd. I don't go and smell a peach and remember what a peach is like, because I have all of that in your mind, and you do too. So for me, the difficulty with calling out individual notes in something like this is not about going to smell those things again. It's not about having a nectarine here and smelling it and then going to smell the wine. It's about building trust with yourself, which is really, really, it's a tough thing to grasp. There's no other way to tap into these things other than experimentation, tasting more, and then trusting that you know what a peach smells like. You know what a blueberry smells like. You know what a wet stone smells like. All of these things that you would find on a traditional tasting wheel that goes through fruit, earth, nuts, herbs, flowers, all of those things that are on the tasting wheel, we have likely smelled in our lives. And even if it's not that specific, like white flowers, that can mean a lot of different things. And for everyone, white flower smell will translate differently from person to person. So now it's about smelling those things and being able to articulate it. And what's most difficult is when all of those things are coming out at the same time, which I think is people's biggest struggle. So to build that trust with yourself, start slower. Rather than going in and trying to pick out cherry in a wine, why not instead go to the wine and think first, before you smell it, about anything that a white wine could taste like or smell like. And you can do a little research. It can smell like stone fruits or green fruits. It can smell like apple. It can smell like citrus. There can be flowers in there. There can be earthiness and nuttiness. Think about all of those. You're activating your sensory memory and pulling out all of those scents, and then go to the wine. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have been able to pull out anything, but I would have been able to say, this smells refreshing. I don't like and I don't hate the smell. I'm impartial towards it. It smells really familiar. And then I would get to the point where I would start to describe it in a metaphor. So this smells like if I'm sitting down and eating a juicy nectarine. Is it because it smells like nectarine? I don't know if I smell nectarine, but it's definitely like eating a piece of fruit, like the refreshing part of it, like the fruit is cold and it's juicy. And from what I said about biting into a piece of fruit, whether I got specific about it or not, I can already tell that this wine is juicy, it's refreshing, it's cooling, it's very fruity. Everything that I just described leads me to think that this is a juicy, fruity wine. From there, as long as you're tasting more wines, you can start to get more specific. So eventually, when you smell the glass, you'll say, okay, I know Viognier is very floral, and that's what it's known for. So let me go in search of flowers. Yeah, I'm getting like a Dove soap type of thing, and that's very floral. Dove soap is very, very floral. And so those are related to each other, I think. And there's something else there that I can't quite put my finger on, but maybe it's a different kind of flower. And then what's related to flowers? I think of potpourri. I think of cream. I start to think of refreshing things like marshmallows. And you just lead yourself down a train of thought. And you can do this in two different ways. You can get very structured about it, or you can be very loose. You can let the wine kind of guide you and talk about the wine, and let yourself lead from flowers to fruit to citrus to maybe some spices that you usually find in a muddle with some citrus peels. Or you can get a tasting wheel or make a chart for yourself and go down the list. And there are some programs like the WSET, which is what I test through. That's the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. They have a grid that you can follow that's separated into a couple different groups. And it starts at the very top with citrus. Oh no, I think it starts with flowers. So you go through the list of flowers and you try and think about whether you're finding any of those there. Then you go to the next row and it's green fruit, and they have listed out apple, pear, gooseberry. And you think about each one individually and you smell the wine and you just kind of circle which ones you think are present in there. And eventually you build yourself a list of all the compounds that you think are present in the wine. And then you can go back as you've been tasting the wine more and review it and get very, very specific. It takes time, and usually having a chart written down will help people who think in a very structured way not miss anything. And I've certainly practiced that. I went the first way, and I started with general metaphors and then started to slowly get more and more specific. There are people that I work with that definitely need the chart in front of them and just to follow it down the line, which is absolutely acceptable. All right, I'm looking at the comments to see if y'all had any questions. Awesome. Rachel is eating something salty with her wine. And she said it's changing something. That's going to lead us into our next point, point number 6. Lane gets a peach pie smell, a little baking spice. Oh, everyone smell the wine. Peach pie. That's not what I'm getting. I'm sure that's what you're getting. And there's a reason for it. So everyone is registering this wine differently. Everyone's smelling something different, which means that Lane smells a certain type of peach pie that she has likely had before that I didn't have. My type of peach pie is made from a can with a pie crust that came out of the freezer. Lane, maybe you've had better pie crusts than me before, better peach pies. So it's all about translating in our own words, essentially. So if you're tasting along with somebody else, don't necessarily go along with everything they're saying. Take what they're saying and then let it inform you. So Lane is getting baking spices off this. So I'm going to translate what that means for me. For me, it's marshmallow cream. Oh, I see what you mean by the spice notes. For me, it's a woody smell, almost like an oak tree. Like I'm leaning up against an oak tree and eating a marshmallow. That's what that smell is for me. And I love when people are smelling wine differently. I celebrate it. This is the beauty of wine, is everyone's going to smell something different and talk about the wine in a different way. Hi, Elise. How are you? We're tasting the Lost Straw Cellars 2021 Viognier. I don't know if you can see it because my light's very, very bright. 2021 Viognier from Lost Straw Vineyards. And it's delicious. You're going to love it. All right. Lane is getting a light beer smell. It's a little bit yeasty, which is why a lot of beer lovers love Viognier. Yes, I love that. I love comparing wine to beer, and I've heard that Viognier and lager thing before. It's almost like foamy, like white. I don't know. I could smell this forever. It smells almost like wheat to me now that you brought up that spice note thing. So here is the next point. Taste with other people. If you are tasting by yourself, it is so much more difficult. Taste with other people in a setting like this, or maybe you have some friends over and you talk about the wine. Maybe you're watching a video and tasting wine while watching the video. Allow yourself to have a conversation or have something else going on in the room that will help you think of new things. Because ultimately, when we stop smelling new things in the glass, it's typically because our mind is not stimulated anymore. And you just have to keep the conversation going. Because if I talk to y'all long enough, I will come up with 20 more tasting notes for this wine, I guarantee. But by myself, staying quiet, I'm only going to taste the things that I've already tasting, and I'm going to lose interest after that. Another way to do this, if you don't have another person and you want to practice tasting by yourself, grab a second wine. The second wine will help to be your conversation bridge, and it'll help to stimulate your mind. So, for instance, I'm tasting this Viognier. I could get a red wine and smell the red wine and talk about the differences between the two wines. That's a very extreme example. When you start to fine tune it, you get a second white wine or a second Viognier, even from different countries, even from the same country, even from the same state. Taste two different Lost Straw Cellars Viogniers next to each other. And don't try and pick out specific tasting notes. Just try and describe the difference between the two. You'll likely start off with saying, oh my gosh, this first one, I really liked the smell when I opened it, but the second one, it seems really dull to me. And I know that Viognier is not a dull grape, so maybe that's saying something else about the wine. Maybe it's that the wine that smells dull is just richer and more subtle, and it's less fruity, which means that the other one is more fruity and more aromatic. And you'll find new things in each wine because you're tasting them next to each other and your mind remains stimulated. I hope that made sense to everybody. This is something that I commonly practice, and very often I'm not tasting one wine at a time. I open 5 bottles at a time and I taste them all next to each other. And then when I'm finished tasting all of them, I go back and confirm everything I thought, because the second time around, you typically change your tasting notes and you feel like you're tasting a totally different wine. And this can help you get more specific and be more objective about the wine, because ultimately we're tasting this wine now in a singular moment in time, and the next moment it's going to taste different. And the next day it's going to be totally different because we're in a different place personally. No questions popped up? I feel everyone thinking really hard about that. Okay, so to Rachel's point with the food, part of looking at all sides of the wine means causing the wine to change when you are stumped. So when I'm tasting just this wine by myself, I've described all the things that I could. Maybe I wasn't able to describe it as well as I wanted to. Now it's time to decant it. Let's get some oxygen in there. Let's see if decanting this does anything new for me. Yeah, it did. All of that soapy dove thing that I was getting before is gone. And now it's just a laser beam perfume of citrus and flowers. The peach is completely gone now. I'm noticing all of these other things. It's a little bit more rustic now. The spices are completely coming out. It smells and tastes like a totally different wine. So whereas I might have been stumped before on the wine, now I've opened it up and I've put it into a new phase so that I can get more from it. And let's see if it tastes different too. Tastes a little bit lighter in body. Before it felt heavier and more weighted. Now it feels light and silky. So we're causing the wine to change its balance in order for us to see more sides of it. And this can help you get a really expanded, complex tasting note, but it can also help beginners start to tap into the wine and see how the balance is changing. Another way you can do this is to eat some food with it. Put a little salt, like you're going to take a tequila shot, lick the salt, and then go back to the wine and see how the wine changed. I guarantee you there's going to be one note that pops out that you didn't notice before. And it was there the entire time. It just needed you to cull it out of the glass. And food pairing is a great way to do that. We'll talk about this more next week when we start talking about food pairing, but there are different food components that will cause the wine to change. And just very briefly, these include umami, bitter, spiciness, sweetness, saltiness, fat, and something else that I can't remember, but we'll talk about next week. But there's a long list of components in food that will change the wine. And as the wine changes, you can benefit from it and tell more from it. I hope that made sense, and I hope that helps some people tap into their wine more. So the point is that you need to have more fun with your wine. In order to fully tap into what's in the glass, you need to be more experimental. You need to not sit in front of the glass and think too much about it, because ultimately thinking is going to shut down your sensory memory. And it's what's in your sensory memory that we want to tap into. So thinking back on your past will help. Talking to other people will help. Listening to music can help. Watching something while you're tasting can help. Discussing with other people. It's all stimulating your mind. And that mental power is what we're trying to stimulate. And then from there, it's about just articulating anything, talking about it out loud, because that's transference from your sensory memory into vocalization. It takes a lot of mind power. And as you practice both of those steps and then smell the wine, you will start to, it'll be like opening an old trunk that you thought was locked and couldn't get into, and looking at what's inside, and you're so delighted by what's inside. All right. I have a couple of questions, so I'm going to check these out before we hop off for the night. That's right. This is the end of this session on tasting technique. Awesome. Okay, Lane's question is Viognier used more as a 100% varietal in blends? Because she knows it's fantastic with Roussanne and Marsanne. Okay, so in Viognier's country of origin, which is in France, it is grown in the south of France, in the Rhone, and it's grown mostly in the northern Rhone. So the Rhone is split into two major regions. The top is the northern Rhone, the bottom is the Côte du Rhône, which is the south. They're very different growing environments, and Viognier is known as the white wine grape that's primarily associated with the northern Rhone. In the northern Rhone, it is grown as a 100% variety. You will see it in blends in the Côte du Rhône and in general Rhone blends, but in the northern Rhone, you will find Viognier by itself. And the main region that it's from, in Condrieu, it is known for stellar, ageable, textured, wonderful, high quality, 100% Viognier wines. And those are beautiful. So if you really want to jump outside of your box, go and find a Condrieu. All right. The last question I saw on here. So my mom is drinking the Uplift Blanc, which is a blend of Viognier, Roussanne, and Marsanne, which I forgot to mention. In classic south of France, you'll see Viognier by itself, but around the world, Viognier, Marsanne, and Roussanne are blended together. And Texas is starting to grab onto that blend and treat them all similarly because they grow well in a similar environment. And each one of those grapes will complement the blend in a different way. Marsanne will bring structure and fruitiness. Viognier will have lower acidity, but will tend to be more floral and aromatic. It can have a pretty full body and kind of boost up the body. And then Roussanne is very nutty, earthy. It has a bunch of that other stuff, so it'll fill in the flavors that Viognier and Marsanne don't bring to the party. So it is delightful in a blend together. That being said, this Viognier by itself is fantastic. So are all of Lost Straw Cellars Roussons. Their Marsanne right now is drinking incredible, and it's almost entirely Marsanne. It tastes like a dry apple cider. I mean, it's just such a cool wine. So it's really cool to see each of these made into single variety wines and then them blended together. Both are fantastic, kind of similar to Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot. All of these are found in blends and single variety wines. And we do a little bit of both because they're all awesome. John, great question. Can white wines have tannins? Yes, white wine can have a very small amount of what we call phenolic bitterness. So with red wine, you call it tannin. With white wine, it's just a little bit of phenolic bitterness, which is equivalent to tannin. And this can come from two different places. It can come from the grape skin, from pressing. If you press a wine that has a thick skin, or if you press it hard, you can extract some tannin content from the skin. But it can also come from oak barrel aging, oak vessel. And this Viognier was aged in oak vessel. It's a neutral oak vessel, so you shouldn't be getting any spice notes from it. It's not an oaky wine, but it was aged in an oak vessel that was old enough to not impart any flavor, but to allow oxygen to transform the wine, which is why when you smell it, it kind of blows you away. That is oxygen in the winemaking process. William, you're so right. Decanting really changes the wine. I'm so happy to hear you've never decanted a white wine before. I love telling people that they can decant white wines. And when you have a bold white wine like this, you can decant them. And notice that I decanted in this really tiny decanter, just really softly, very simply. I just did a little like pour in, pour out. This wine doesn't need a ton of oxygen, and I don't want to hurt the wine. But putting it in this vessel and then pouring it in here won't harm the wine. It won't harm the aromatics. You'll tell pretty quickly if you've harmed the wine with decanting, but just decant a little bit of your white wine to see if it does anything cool to the wine. I love decanting my white wines, and I love drinking them at red wine temperature. It ultimately is all preference. But your finer white wines, if you decant them, you'll see how complex and fantastic they really are. Okay, last question. John asked, he sees Viognier blended with reds, and why are they adding it for? This is a practice that we use occasionally, but is mostly done in France. Viognier is commonly blended with Syrah, which is also grown in the Northern Rhone region. And they blend it with Syrah first to boost aromatics. Syrah isn't quite as aromatic as this. This is very aromatic. So they complement each other, and you can make a very aromatic style of Syrah if you blend in just a little bit of Viognier. It'll also add floral characteristics to the wine potentially. But one major reason it's used is for color extraction. So you have a certain amount of color in the Syrah skins. If you blend in a little bit of Viognier, the Viognier juice will soak up more of that color. And so will the Syrah juice. So you can get a very deeply colored red wine with a lot of aromatics and floral characteristics. Amongst other reasons, there are many, many reasons I could go on about why blending white and red grape varieties is beneficial, but Viognier is commonly blended with red wines for those couple of reasons and many more. It's a really cool technique, and we have practiced that before. And you'll notice when you have a really aromatic red wine that smells like flowers, you'll think about Viognier next time, hopefully. All right, guys, this brings us to the end of the lesson. But before y'all hop off, if you didn't get your pack yet, next week we're drinking Touriga Nacional from Robert Clay Vineyards. This is a 2017, so this is a back vintage wine. This wine loves food, so bring something salty. Saltine crackers, oyster crackers, it can be a piece of cheese. Bring something salty so that you can see how the wine interacts with salt. And then the last thing is next Wednesday, Chris and Catherine and our chef Skip at William Chris Vineyards are hosting a virtual tasting where you can cook along, and you can find both this pack of wines and the Virtual Winemakers Feast pack, which includes these bold red blends, the Salt Lick Cabernet Sauvignon from the Texas Hill Country and the Moonlight Vineyards blend. And we are making this really cool recipe that Chef Skip put together. It's you can't see it. It's a cornbread stuffing recipe. So grab a pack and join next Wednesday if you enjoy these virtual tastings and if you enjoy cooking. Also, those wines are beautiful wines. So grab a pack even if you can't join next week. That's all, guys. I will see y'all next week to start talking about food pairing and drink some Touriga Nacional. So thanks for joining. If you had any more questions, put them in the comments and I will be happy to answer them next week for you. But till then, have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend, and enjoy the rest of this Viognier. Bye, guys.